Hi and welcome to another game video, and in today's video I want to talk about, well, I'm a big fan of portable consoles, hence this channel, and I absolutely love my new 3DS XL. I'm a big fan of just the DS in general, and I am a massive fan of my PlayStation Vita. But if you've watched my channel, you'll know that I am not massively taken by the Switch. Recently we got a Switch as a family console, and I've done a few videos on it, so I've played around with it for a bit, and it is a good console. I'm not trying to knock the Switch, but I haven't warmed to it like I did every other console, every other Nintendo console, Sony console, Sega console. There's just something about the Switch that puts me off it. About a year or so ago I had enough funds to buy a new console, and it was a toy up between a Switch Lite and a PlayStation Vita, and hands down it was a very easy decision for me to go for the PS Vita, because the PlayStation Vita is a phenomenal console. It's got a great selection of games, the hardware is superb, and it is one of those consoles that doesn't get the love that it deserves. But I could have gone for a Switch Lite, would have put me in, well, I would have had a modern console for the first time in a long time, but I didn't. I think one of the reasons I got put off by that is because you cannot mod most Switch models, and I'm a big fan of custom firmware and running things on consoles that you shouldn't do. And I know you can mod some Switch models, so I think the very first one, what they call the V1, you can either soft mod or hard mod. Can't quite remember, but you can't mod a V2 or an OLED or a Switch Lite. Now, if I'm wrong on that, please someone correct me. I'm not fully up to date on the Switch modern scene, but every console that I've bought I try and mod in some way. So with my DS Lites, I got flash carts and ran things on there I shouldn't do. Everything from then onwards, like the DSIs and the DSi XLs, and my 3DS, my new 3DS XL, the new 2DS XL I had, a PSP and a PS Vita, all ran custom firmware on. It just opens up the system to far more, and maybe it's because the Switch is it's a current console. I know Nintendo, well, especially Nintendo, aren't a fan of people modding their consoles. Even with the 3DS, they are still playing a chase game of trying to block it and stop people doing it, even though they don't really care about the 3DS. It seems to be more of a principle for them. So with the Switch, it seems as if it's going to be a while off before they are soft moddable, and that's some of the reason I have not gone for it, because the Switch is a great console. You take the power from the PlayStation Vita, see what you can do on that. There's so much you can do if you've got custom firmware running on a PS Vita. So if you were to take that to the Switch, there's the hardware in the Switch. Okay, it's not as powerful as its generation counterparts such as the PS4 and the Xbox One, but for a Nintendo console it's very powerful. And the things you could do on a Switch, the games you could play, the unofficial ports that you could play on a Switch that was running custom firmware would be fantastic. It really would open up the Switch hardware to far more than Nintendo are offering at the minute. So it's a Nintendo device. It tends to be very cut down, very family friendly, but the hardware inside the Switch could easily handle some unofficial PC ports. I mean, we've had Quake 2 officially released on the Switch and it runs fantastically, but then we've had Quake 2 released on things like the 3DS and the PS Vita, and they run fantastic. So just think of what more modern games could be ported across to the Switch unofficially, and they would run superb. The Switch is great hardware, the screen is superb, the processing behind it and the GPU in it is amazing, and it's kind of hampered by the fact that it just only allowed to run official titles, and those official titles, while some of them are a bit more mature than previous Nintendo consoles, it's still very limited to a lot of family friendly Nintendo titles. So that's me talking about why I don't own a Switch. For me it would be a Switch Lite. and I know a lot of people have tried to put me off. If I was to go down the Switch route, it would be a Switch Lite, because it's the natural successor to the 3DS. I am a huge fan of portable consoles. I have no need to hook my consoles up to a TV, so a Switch Lite would be the one for me. Now, I know there are lots of downsides to the Switch Lite, so you've got no rumble, non-removable Joy-Con, so some games will not play out of the box. You'd possibly get around that by pairing some Joy-Cons to it. The battery life is between 3.5 and 6 hours, so on the same level as the V1 Switch, the V2 Switch and the OLED, vastly increased battery life. So there are some downsides to owning a Lite, but for me, that's the console that I would go if I was going down the Switch route. But I'm not going to do that yet, not until that you can run custom firmware and it's at least fairly stable, because I'm running custom firmware on my PS Vita, and when it works, it's fantastic, but it is probably one of the most unstable custom firmwares I've ever come across. The 3DS custom firmware is absolutely rock solid, as is the PSP. So I wouldn't want to go for a Switch Lite running custom firmware that is just about coping, because I know the troubles I've had with the Vita. But that is some of the reason I have stayed away from the Switch platform altogether, because I look at the range of games that are available for it officially, and I think, well, they're not for me. When I was going down the do I buy a Switch Lite or a PS Vita route, the first thing I did was look at the game selection, because the price of both of those consoles are roughly around the same on the second-hand market, and I looked at the style and, well, the availability of games on the system. And the Vita, it was, well, the whole Sony brand is an adult orientated platform. The PSP was, and the Vita was, and it's got some fantastic grown-up titles, lots of first-person shooters, which the Switch platform seems to lack. It's got a few. Oddly enough, it's got Doom and Doom Eternal, which I always mention when I'm talking about Switch games. But the majority of the games for the Switch are more family or child orientated. Like I said, it's a little bit more grown up than previous consoles. But when I was comparing the two, the Vita and the Switch Lite, the game selection on the Vita just stuck out to me more. And obviously you've got custom firmware availability on the Vita, which opens it up for even more fantastic ports and mature titles. So once the Switch platform gets a bit more mature, and once the availability of custom firmware is an option, and then people start porting things to the Switch, things that Nintendo wouldn't bring out, then I may consider it. But for me, the Switch platform is still a child-orientated or family-orientated console with family-friendly games, no custom firmware, and that's not what for me. I love to have a tinker with a console. I mean, within half an hour of buying my new 3DS, I'd already put custom firmware on it. That's just what I like to do. I like to push the consoles past what they're supposed to do, past what they're intended for. And I've played with the Switch that we own as a family, and it's alright. It's a nice console, but it just doesn't offer me personally anything that I could get my teeth into. So for now, I'm staying out of the Switch platform. If I was to go down that route, it would be when custom firmware is available, and it would be a Switch Lite. So let me know what your thoughts are. I've mentioned this in previous videos. If you've watched my channel over the last few years, you'll know that I've kind of almost dipped into the Switch market and then veered off somewhere else. So when I had the funds, I bought a PS Vita. The second time I had some funds, I bought a new 3DS XL, and that was only a few months ago, and I could have easily bought a Switch Lite for the same price as both those consoles, but I didn't. It just one of those platforms that piques my interest until I look into it a little further, and then it really doesn't offer something I could get my teeth into. But I'm sure that will change. Maybe when Nintendo bring out the next console, the Switch 2 or the Switch whatever, or maybe it's going to be called something completely different, and they start to forget about the Switch, then the homebrew and custom firmware team will get their teeth into it and really open up the Switch for us tinkerers, us people that like to do things that they shouldn't do on consoles. But for now, that is where I'm sitting. That is why I am still staying away from the Switch platform personally. So let me know what you think. Are you a fan of the Switch? Do you think it is a family orientated console? Would you be interested if custom firmware was there to open up and install different games, different ports of classic games and that sort of thing? Like, subscribe, enjoy.